The holiday dinner was supposed to be a night of laughter, family warmth, and old memories. Instead, I walked into the dining room carrying a secret that was about to destroy everything. Every person I loved was sitting around the polished wooden table. My parents were laughing quietly. My sister Nora was helping her children with dessert. And beside the head of the table sat my wife Claire, smiling as if our marriage was perfect. Across from her sat Ethan. The moment I saw him, my stomach tightened. He looked comfortable, too. Comfortable, he leaned back in his chair with the confident smile of a man who believed he had nothing to fear. He was wrong. My right hand stayed inside my coat pocket, wrapped tightly around a small black flash drive. That drive contained the truth. Only hours earlier, I had discovered the messages, videos, and private conversations that had exposed the secret life my wife had been living for 6 months. Ethan was not some stranger from her past. He was the man she had been meeting behind my back while looking into my eyes every morning and pretending everything was normal. I had spent the entire night watching the evidence again and again. There was no misunderstanding. There was no innocent explanation. There was only betrayal. For months, they had stolen my trust while I carried the weight of our home, our bills, our future, and every promise I had imagined confronting them 100 different ways. But nothing prepared me for seeing them sitting together at my family table. I walked toward the television. Claire noticed me immediately. Her smile disappeared. "What are you doing?" she asked. I did not answer. I connected the flash drive to the television and picked up the remote. The room slowly became silent. Claire stood halfway from her chair. "Please do not," she whispered. That was the moment I knew she was guilty. I pressed play. The screen came alive. Within seconds, the first video appeared. Claire and Ethan were together. Their laughter filled the room, then their whispers, then the unmistakable intimacy that shattered the last piece of hope inside me. Nobody moved. My mother's hand covered her mouth. My father stared at the screen in disbelief. Nora froze beside her children. Claire turned completely pale. Her fork slipped from her fingers and crashed against the plate. Ethan stopped smiling. For the first time that evening, he looked afraid. Claire tried to stand. Her knees suddenly gave way. She collapsed beside the chair while everyone screamed for help. But I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on Ethan. He slowly pushed his chair backward and started moving toward the hallway. He thought he could escape. He thought the truth had been revealed and the worst was over. He was about to discover that I was nowhere near finished. I stepped toward him with the fury of a man who had just watched his entire life collapse before his eyes. Ethan barely reached the hallway before I caught him. My hand closed around his jacket and pulled him away from the door. He stumbled backward and crashed into the wall. "What did you think would happen?" I demanded. He said nothing. His eyes moved around the room, searching for someone who might save him. My father stepped forward. "Enough," he shouted, but years of lies had destroyed the calm inside me. I grabbed Ethan by the collar and dragged him toward the dining table. Everyone stared at us as if we were strangers instead of family. "You knew she was married," I said. Ethan swallowed. I knew. That answer made something inside me snap. I shoved him against the table and demanded to know how long this had been happening. He claimed that the relationship had started recently, but the evidence on the screen told a different story. 6 months, I said. He looked away. 6 months. Claire had regained consciousness and was sitting on the floor with tears running down her face. "Please stop," she whispered. I turned toward her. "Stop. You stopped being my wife months ago." She covered her face. I had spent every late night working to pay for the life she wanted. The expensive house, the vacations, the new car, the holiday dinners. I believed every sacrifice was building something permanent. Instead, I had been financing a life where another man was waiting for my wife. Claire stood and shouted that I was never there for her. She accused me of caring more about my career than our marriage. The room went silent. For a second, I wondered if there was something I had failed to see. Then I remembered every message I had found, every lie, every fake business trip, every night she told me she was exhausted while secretly meeting Ethan. "You were lonely," she claimed. "You were never home." I stared at her. I was working for us. My voice shook with anger. Every hour I spent away was supposed to protect the future you wanted. Claire cried. Ethan tried to speak. "We never planned for anyone to get hurt." I looked at him. "You planned everything. You planned the meetings. You planned the lies. You planned to destroy my marriage while smiling at me across this table. Nora stepped between us and begged everyone to calm down, my father shouted. Take this outside. He warned us not to destroy the family here. I looked around the table. Destroyed. The family had already been destroyed. I pointed toward the television. I did not destroy anything tonight. I only showed everyone what had already been happening. Claire began sobbing uncontrollably. Ethan stood frozen beside the table. Then Claire wiped her tears and looked at me. Her expression changed. The fear disappeared. Cold defiance replaced it. Fine, she said. Yes, it lasted 6 months and I knew exactly what she would say next. She was about to tell everyone why she chose him. Claire looked around the room before finally facing me. Ethan stood near the table with blood on his lip and fear written across his face. I asked Claire why. Why him? She took a trembling breath and said, Ethan was there when I was not. That sentence hurt more than I expected, she said. I had changed after marriage. According to her, I became obsessed with work. She said Ethan listened to her. I stared at her in disbelief. You could have talked to me. She lowered her eyes. I did know. You did not. You complained about dinner, you complained about my hours, but you never told me you were planning another life. My father ordered everyone to calm down. Nora moved the children away. I looked at Ethan again. I asked him when he first started meeting Claire. He admitted it began during a work conference 6 months earlier. One meeting became another. Then secret calls, then hotel rooms, then weekends when Claire claimed she was visiting her sister. Every answer made the room colder. My mother cried quiet lol. She kept saying she could not believe Claire had done this. Claire suddenly blamed me again. She said she had felt invisible inside our marriage. I asked whether unhappiness gave her permission to lie. She had no answer. Ethan tried defending He said their feelings were real. I laughed bitterly. Real feelings do not require fake business trips. Real feelings do not require deleting messages. Real feelings do not require looking your husband in the eyes and pretending nothing happened. My father finally told Ethan to leave. Ethan grabbed his coat and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped and looked at me. I am sorry. Those words meant nothing. I let him go. Then I turned toward Claire. She was standing alone beside the table. She was still wearing the necklace I had given her on our wedding anniversary tab. Seeing it around her neck made my chest ache. I asked her whether she had ever loved me. She began crying. Of course I did. I asked whether she still loved me. She could not answer. That silence gave me the answer I needed. I picked up my coat and walked toward the front door. My father called my name. I stopped. He told me not to make a decision while I was angry. I finally looked back. I told him the decision had already been made by Claire months ago. I was simply discovering it tonight. Then I walked outside into the freezing December air. Snow covered the sidewalk. The lights from the decorated houses looked beautiful. But for the first time, I felt completely alone. I kept walking until I reached the small neighborhood park where Claire and I had first fallen in love. I sat on the frozen bench and stared into the darkness. For the first time that night, I finally allowed myself to cry. I sat alone on the frozen bench for nearly an hour. The cold wind cut through my coat, but I barely noticed how. My mind kept returning to the same question. How had I missed it? I remembered Claire standing beside me on our wedding day. I remembered promising that I would protect her and build a life with her. I remembered the first apartment we rented together. The terrible furniture, the cheap meals, the nights when we laughed because we had almost no money. Back then, we had been happy with very little. Somewhere along the way, everything changed. The house became bigger, the vacations became more expensive, the expectations became heavier, and somehow I became the villain because I worked hard enough to provide them. Footsteps suddenly approached from behind. I turned and saw my father walking through the snow. He sat beside me without saying anything. For several minutes, we simply watched the empty playground. Finally he spoke. Your mother and I have been married for 30 years. Marriage is not about never being hurt. It is about what you do. When trust is broken, I asked him what he would do. He looked at me carefully. I would ask myself whether the person I loved still existed. His words stayed with me. He did not tell me to forgive Claire. He did not tell me to divorce her. He simply reminded me that I had a choice. I could spend years trying to repair something built on lies, or I could accept that some things cannot be repaired. When I finally returned to the house, it was almost midnight. The dining room looked strangely normal. The broken dishes had been removed, the table had been cleaned, the television was switched off. But the silence was heavier than the chaos had been. Claire sat alone in the kitchen, a cold cup of tea rested in front of her. She looked exhausted. When she saw me, she stood imid exhaust. "Please let me explain." I raised my hand. "I cannot do this tonight." She started crying. I told her I had nothing left inside me to give. Then I walked upstairs to the guest room. I locked the door. That night, I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the video. I heard her laughter. I heard Ethan whispering. I heard my own life breaking apart. Morning came quietly. When I walked downstairs, the house was almost empty. Nora was sitting in the kitchen. She told me she had forced Claire to leave during the night. She said Claire was staying at a hotel. I nodded without speaking. Later, I drove around town without any destination. I needed distance, I needed silence. Most importantly, I needed an answer. By afternoon, I finally knew where I wanted to go. The old park waited beneath the gray winter sky. I sent Claire one message: "Meet me there." I had no idea that her answer would finally reveal the truth I'd been searching for. Claire arrived at the park 20 minutes later. She looked nothing like the woman who had laughed across my family's dinner table the previous evening. Her face was pale, dark circles surrounded her eyes. The velvet scarf around her neck was the same one I had bought her for our anniversary. For a moment, I could not look at her. She sat at the opposite end of the bench. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered my name. I asked her why she came. "Because I still love you." I almost laughed. Love. The word sounded completely different now. I asked whether she loved me when she was meeting Ethan. She began crying. She said she was confused. She said she felt lonely. She said Ethan made her feel wanted. I listened without interrupting. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Why Ethan? She looked toward the frozen lake. I don't know. I waited. She finally admitted the truth. He was close. He worked near her office. He was available. He listened whenever she complained about our marriage. That was it. Convenience. My entire marriage had apparently been worth less than convenience. The reach toward my hand, I pulled away. She begged me to give her another chance. She promised counseling. She promised she would change jobs. She promised she would answer every question. She promised she would spend the rest of her life proving that she regretted what she had done, but the damage was already deeper than apologies. I asked her whether she had planned to leave me for Ethan. She shook her head. No. Then I asked whether she had considered what would happen if I discovered them. She started crying again. I did not think you would find out. That sentence told me everything. She had not stopped because she realized it was wrong. She had simply believed she would never be caught. I stood from the bench. Claire grabbed my sleeve. Please, I looked down at her. I wanted to feel anger. Instead, I felt emptiness. I told her that I needed time away from the house. Then I walked away. For the next several days, I stayed at my friend Daniel's apartment. He never pressured me. He listened while I talked for hours. Sometimes I repeated the same memories again and again. He never told me what decision to make. One night I opened my laptop. The flash drive was still beside me. I plugged it in. For the first time, I watched the evidence without screaming, without shaking, without hoping to find some explanation. I watched Claire and Ethan together. I noticed details I had ignored before. The conversations were planned, the meetings were scheduled, the lies were coordinated. This had not been one terrible mistake. It had been hundreds of decisions. Claire had chosen him every single time I closed the laptop. The room was completely silent for months. I had wondered whether I had somehow caused this. That night I finally understood. Her betrayal was not my failure. It was her choice. The next morning I made the hardest phone call of my life. I called a family lawyer. When the lawyer answered, I stared through the window at the empty street. Then I said the words that would change everything. I want to begin divorce proceedings. The words felt strange when I said them. I want to begin divorce proceedings. For months I had been terrified of losing my marriage. Now I realized the marriage I feared losing had already disappeared. The lawyer asked me several questions. I answered each one carefully. There was no shouting, no dramatic speech, just paperwork, dates, and facts. For the first time since discovering Claire's betrayal, I felt something close to control returning to my life. When I returned to the house that afternoon, everything felt different. The place was filled with memories. Our wedding photograph hung above the staircase. Our vacation pictures covered the hallway. Her favorite flowers still sat on the kitchen counter. I stood there for several minutes. Then I began packing. Claire's clothes went into boxes. Her shoes followed, then the books she loved, the decorations she had chosen, the small things that once made the house feel like ours. Every box felt like another piece of our marriage leaving. Halfway through packing, I found an old photograph. Claire and I were sitting on the floor of our first apartment. We were young, we were broke, we were laughing. I stared at the picture for a long time. That version of us had been real, but it was gone. I placed the photograph inside a drawer instead of throwing it away. Some memories did not deserve to be destroyed simply because the ending was painful. That evening, Claire called. I almost ignored her. Then I answered. She asked whether I had really contacted a lawyer. I told her yes. She became silent, then she started crying. She said she could not believe I was actually ending our marriage. I reminded her that she had ended it when she decided to build a secret relationship. She insisted that she had made a terrible mistake. I told her mistakes happen once. This happened repeatedly. There were hundreds of chances to stop. She had chosen not to stop. She asked whether there was anything she could do. I thought about it. Then I said no. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I finally understood that forgiveness did not require reconciliation. I could forgive someone someday and still refuse to live with them. After the call ended, I sat alone in the living room. For the first time, I did not feel the urge to check the flash drive. I already knew everything I needed to know. The next morning, I met with the lawyer. We discussed the house, the finances, the legal process, the practical details of separating two lives that had been connected for years. It was painful, but it was also strangely peaceful. There was no uncertainty anymore, no wondering where Claire was, no questioning whether she was telling the truth, no waiting for another lie to appear. That evening, I walked through the house one final time before leaving for a few days. I stood in the dining room, the same room where everything had exploded during the holiday dinner. I remembered the television, the silence, Claire's fake, Ethan's fiafa. And the moment I realized my life would never return to what it had been. I turned off the lights, then I locked the front door behind me. I did not know exactly what my future would look like, but for the first time, I was ready to discover it. On my own terms, the morning after I left the house, I woke before sunrise. I stared at the ceiling of Daniel's apartment. Then I realized something surprising. I was not thinking about Claire. I was thinking about myself. For the first time, I wondered what my life might look like without carrying someone else's lies. The divorce process was not easy. There were difficult conversations, financial decisions, and memories. Claire tried several times to convince me to reconsider. She sent messages promising she had changed. She asked me to remember the woman she had been before the affair. I did remember. That was exactly why leaving hurt so much. I had not married a stranger. I had married the person I once trusted more than anyone, but trust could not survive where honesty had been deliberately destroyed. Weeks passed, the decorations disappeared from the streets, the snow began melting. Slowly, my life became quieter. I started going to the gym again. I began meeting friends for dinner. I worked without feeling guilty for taking time for myself. I even returned to the small park where Claire and I had once fallen in love. This time I sat on the same bench alone. It no longer felt like a place of loss. It felt like the beginning of something new. One afternoon, my father joined me. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was healing, not completely, but enough. He smiled and said that was all anyone could ask. Months later, the divorce ended. Claire moved into another apartment. Ethan disappeared from our lives. I never learned whether their relationship survived after everything came to light. I stopped caring. That was the clearest sign I had moved forward. One evening, I returned home after work and noticed how peaceful the house forward. There were no secrets, no hidden messages, no excuses, no feeling that something was wrong, just silence. But this time the silence was comforting. I opened the window and let the evening air enter. I looked at the empty dining table. I remembered the holiday dinner that had changed everything. For a long time, I thought that night had destroyed my life. Eventually, I understood the truth. It had not destroyed my life. It had exposed the life that was already broken. The betrayal forced me to face reality. It forced me to stop begging for something that no longer exists. And most importantly, it taught me that walking away from betrayal is not weak exist. Sometimes it is the strongest decision a person can make. I still carried scars, but scars were proof that wounds could heal. I closed the curtains and smiled. My future was uncertain, but it belonged to me again, and that was enough. If this story touched your heart, remember that your worth should never depend on someone else's loyalty. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories.